Welcome, everyone. I'm Nancy Netzer, inaugural Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Director of the McMullen Museum and Professor of Art History at Boston College. And I want to welcome all of you from near and far to the members' introductory lecture of the exhibition, States of Becoming. The McMullen is indeed honored to present this groundbreaking exhibition, which celebrates 17 African diaspora artists in the United States, all of whom work in a variety of media. Each explores the various forces related to relocation that have influenced their artistic production. The exhibition was produced by Independent Curators International, based in New York City. For several decades, ICI has been a leader in supporting young curators to create exhibitions of contemporary art with the aim of generating public engagement with art across generations and social, cultural, and geographic boundaries. One such curator is Fitsum Shebeshe, to whom we owe our greatest debt of gratitude for curating States of Becoming, and whom we're honored to have as our speaker today. I want to take this opportunity to thank the 17 artists represented in the exhibition, and also to congratulate and thank our colleagues at ICI. Executive and Artistic Director Renaud Proche, Director of Exhibitions Becky Nahum, Exhibitions Coordinator Ali Lorico, and Communications and Digital Content Manager Taylor Black. In 2022, when the McMullen team shared the prospectus for States of Becoming, our faculty colleagues in African and African diaspora studies, especially then Chair Martin Summers and Vice Chair Richard Paul, embraced with enthusiasm the possibility of the McMullen hosting the exhibition. After Assistant Director Diana Larson visited the exhibition at its first venue, the Africa Center in New York, all of us here agreed that States of Becoming was not only an assemblage of outstanding works, but also that the exhibition's narrative focused on questions which are central to Boston College's mission as a Jesuit university. Subsequently, Professors Javona Jones and current chair Laurel Semley worked with our Manager of Education, Outreach, and Digital Resources, Rachel Chamberlain, to establish a robust lineup of courses, lectures, and other public programs in collaboration with African and African Diaspora Studies program. This semester, we aim to engage our campus and the broader community in conversations on identity construction in the face of relocation and resettling by referencing examples of how various diaspora artists navigate the interplay between ancestral African heritages and prevailing American cultural paradigms. I'd like to call out just a few of our upcoming programs. On Wednesday, September 18th, our new faculty member in African and African Diaspora Art History, Professor Justin Brown, will offer a virtual lecture on the upcoming exhibition he co-curated at the National Gallery in Washington, Spirit and Strength, Modern Art from Haiti. From October 3rd through 6th, Boston College will host an international conference co-organized by Professor Laurel Semley on global Black French studies across time and space, the formation and future of the field. And on October 29th, Yale Professor of African American Studies, Nana Andusi Poku, will present a virtual lecture focusing on distinctions between African and African diaspora art. We invite you to visit the events menu option on our McMullen website often for a developing list of free programs that we've organized to enhance the exhibition and for which you are all welcome to register. As always, we extend gratitude to our team at the McMullen. In consultation with Fitsum, Diana Larsa designed our flexible galleries to show off the works to their best advantage and to establish flow through the exhibition to follow the developing narrative. Assistant Director John McCoy formatted ICI's exhibition didactics and designed our website. Assistant Director Kate Shugart oversaw organization of the exhibition on our end, as well as the exhibition text. And as already mentioned, Rachel Chamberlain has organized a long list of engaging accompanying programs, including this one today, as well as the creation of a digital walkthrough of the exhibition. The McMullen docents, chaired by Sharon Bazarian, deserve a shout out for mastering the narratives of this multidimensional exhibition to provide an informed and engaging experience to share with our audiences on both in-person and virtual tours. Produced by Independent Curators International, States of Becoming received its lead funding from the Hartfield Foundation, as well as generous support from ICI's Board of Trustees, International Forum, and Crozier Fine Arts. As always, the McMullen extends special thanks for the ongoing support of those who make its exhibitions possible: the administration of Boston College and the McMullen Family Foundation. We especially thank the patrons of the McMullen Museum, chaired by Michael Daly, and our lead sponsors for States of Becoming, Robert and Anne Marie Reardon. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Fitsum Shebeshe, a curator and painter based in Baltimore and Washington. Fitsum holds an MFA in curatorial practice from the Maryland Institute College of Art. Before moving to the United States in 2016, he was assistant curator at the National Museum of Ethiopia, where he co-founded the 1957 initiative to annually celebrate the liberation of African countries from colonialism, and where he curated the 1957 art show on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the African Union in 2013. At the Baltimore School of Arts, he curated Depart Africa in 2017. This morning, we're honored to have him share with us his inspiration and vision for States of Becoming. His presentation will last about 40 minutes, after which he'll take questions. So I ask you to keep your speakers muted. And now, please join me in welcoming Fitsum as I invite him to share his screen.
Thank you, Nancy, for the lovely introduction. I hope everyone can hear me fine. So my name is again Fitsum Shebeshe. I moved to this country in 2016 to go to a graduate school in Baltimore, Maryland, and that's when this project started. developing in my mind. And since then, it has evolved to its current stage. A little bit about exhibition background is I started working on it as a part of my thesis project for the graduation class. And back then, I was focused on two of the artists who are uh, uh, still in the show. It's a luck to have them around, but at the time they were both Amara Salfu and Chikudumebi Gabriel Amina, who were in Baltimore City, that I've in some ways shared my experience with them. And those were my focus at the time when I started the exhibition and the idea of this exhibition. But the difference between now and then was I was only focused on how their works shifted instead of, what makes their work shifted in what the uh, core ideas that made them view the world differently. But I was instead focused on, how their work evolved since they moved to the United States from Ethiopia and Nigeria, respectively. So the exhibition States of Becoming has the following uh, three key drivers that uh, shape and reshape the way the artist and myself see the world around us. And the first one is cultural. This is mostly in a culture of American, of course, but when someone moves from places like Africa, like myself, and being exposed to American cultures, there are a lot of things that I need to learn from, and there are things that in a culture where I came from could be seen as a taboo to be, spoken publicly. However, moving to America, like there are things, especially like, sensitive topics like sexual orientation, ethnicity or race or things like that can be discussed, freely here. So being exposed to conversations like that challenge the core belief of where these artists came from significantly shape how the artist and myself view the world. The other key driving factor of the exhibition is environmental influence. This is mostly the location where the artists are located. For example, living in Baltimore and let's say living in Iowa might have a different influence in terms of how we, the artists, view themselves as a Black person, and that in some ways contribute into their practice and how they see the world around them and its citizen. Another is in institutional context. This is usually art institutions. For example, there are narratives associated with the continent this artist hailed from that has sometimes an outdated or limited in terms of depth in research, and that sometimes can be misinformative. And you can see this in a few other exhibitions that specifically talks about Africa as well in the past. And it's also something that I have experienced in institutions around me whenever they present arts from the continent. It's either mostly focused on a specific region, but still holds the title of, being art of Africa or African art. And this kind of Western view of the continent and the culture the artist came from influences how the artists practice and how they view the world. And this is the number of artists in their respective countries on the right, in cities, some of the cities they are currently based at. We have 17 artists from 12 different African countries in the Caribbean. In my approach for this exhibition is to look to include artists from different parts of Africa. We have artists from northern parts of Africa, East Africa, from countries that never been colonized, West Africa, Southern Africa. In that way, I believed that it can represent a comprehensive cultural practice of the continent by, including artists from different regions of the continent. And what I'd like to mention on this one is, although the exhibition is focused on artists who relocated from Africa to the United States, this is, of course, also artists relocating to a new place is a phenomenon that has been there, since the medieval, and it's still happening. But my main interest in this show, or the interest of the states of becoming, is not the physical relocation of these artists, but rather their internal moves, like the things they have made them shift their belief in, the things that make them shift their perspectives. And I'm more of interested in the internal migration of these artists rather than how they physically got into the US or why they came to the US. In fact, most of them came here, included myself, for higher education, some for personal and familial reasons, and the rest were born here from an African diaspora family. In states of becoming, there are three groupings. This grouping, again, is not only from a curatorial point of view, but also in terms of the teams each group are focused in. The first group is the artists who are building hybrid aesthetics, and the second group is, which I'll be discussing in a few minutes, artists who are looking to their roots to inform their work, and the third group is artists of first generation of African diaspora who are connecting the two continents, Africa and the United States, culturally and historically. Although I also have to say that even if each artist is associated with a certain group, I have to admit that there is an overlap in terms of their practice and the teams they are interested in. So looking at the first group, this group of artists are artists who moved here within the past 3 decades and who are mostly focused on the aesthetic, a hybrid aesthetic in their practice. Their relocation significantly contributes to a conversation that's usually occurring internally. They usually try to redefine themselves and their identity and their belongings. So the conversation mostly for this group of artists revolves around internal dialogue and reinterpreting their identities, and in return that contributes to how they practice their artwork. Also, they mostly assimilate the culture, and you'll see the effect of American culture and their African roots, in their work, in a way that kind of an idea pollination between, America and the African continent. And I also, if I have to categorize myself, I would put myself in this first group, who has been in some ways affected by the relocation to the United States in terms of my practice and how I view the world. I went back to Ethiopia a few years ago, and where I came from, that's where I came from, Ethiopia. And I found myself not being the old Fitsum I was there when I was, in Ethiopia, but also not Fitsum that I'm completely, Americanized. There is some elements of my Ethiopianness in me, and also there is an element that I took American culture, mainly elements from the culture that I took, that created a kind of, hybrid self in me. So the first work from this group I would like to discuss is Kibrom's self-portrait, Kibrom Raya. This happens to be also one of my favorite pieces in the exhibition, and not just because it's uh, academically rendered in a refined way, but there is an essence that speaks to most of the people who have gone through the same experience as the artist uh, have gone through. So in this painting, as we can see it, Kibrom used kind of earth color with some sort of a vibrant color on the on the right side that in some ways reflects uh, his struggle to uh, assimilate the new culture in America. Coming from the Ethiopia, Kibrom, I've known, he's also happens to be one of the artists I've known for more than 20 years, I believe, and have witnessed, his shift as an artist, both in terms of also a personal level. He's currently based in New York City, but he came from a very conservative Christian cultural background, which is the case for myself and most people from my region. But as he lives in the US, I can see his conversation also evolving, not only his artwork, but the way he speaks about topics and the way he sees himself has drastically, has shifted. And that's what I call internal shift in a shift in, a belief or a shift in heart. Um, Going back to this work, it's almost composition wise, it feels like it's almost asymmetrical and confrontational in the way he used, the stroke, like in the background, he made it a more of smoother. And when it comes to the foreground, he left it almost a loose brush stroke, and it almost feels like it's painted in with rush. Uh, but I think what's the most important thing about this painting is it portrays his inner, sense that you can tell from his eyes. He's been through some kind of struggle trying to adjust to life in the United States, and at some point also uh, his perception of himself, like, I'm here, the composition is almost confrontational, and the use of color also in some ways reflects how he wished to be perceived by the viewers, like a combination of a muted color with a vibrant color that in a way tells his Ethiopian root and American lifestyle. And the second artist we have is Chukwudumebi Gabriela Marie Imina, a Nigerian artist who moved to Savannah in 2009 and currently who lives in Baltimore. Gabriel is one of the earliest artists I had in my show at grad school as well. I have seen him evolve both personally, also in terms of his practice. Um, this particular piece is called Fade Catcher, and it's taken from the slang, American slang, to catch a fade. Um, for him, he questions his American and African roots, while his African roots is fading away. He is finding a way to preserve it by strengthening his relationship with the community, the Black community he lives in Baltimore. On the other side, also, he talks about in this work um, uh, this complexity of white fear of blackness, in a way that his flower on his face represents how he uh, chose to, or the way he chose to preserve himself from conversations like that, in how uh, African diaspora artists preserve themselves from those uh, complex topics usually associated with blackness. Another artist we have in the first group is Amara Selfu. He also happens to be from Ethiopia. I have known this artist since I was a junior high, and I've been an admirer of his practice, and before he moved to the US, and still I'm admirer of his painting. And one of the artists that got me interested to think about this project is Amara. So the painting on the left was painted 2007. And as you can see, the medium is oil, and the one on the left, excuse me, on the right is painted in 2019 after he moved to the US. He moved here around 2011. When I see the difference, I was super interested to know what was going on in his mind, because I've known him painting like the first one forever. Then when I came to America, he completely paints differently. So in the first one, as you can see, Mara, paints uh, almost follows Ethiopian painting traditional techniques influenced by European academies. You can see the figures, the semi-abstract, in how he constructs the atmosphere in the brush stroke he used, the light and the shadow, and it's well balanced and academically well, crafted painting. Whereas on the left one, he predominantly used lines to paint. So when Amara used to teach in Ethiopia at the university, he encouraged his students to not use a ruler so that they can be good in freehand drawings, and they can be, a good artist. But when he moved here, he abandoned, that, not advising his students not to use a ruler. Instead, he started using rulers and, painting using a ruler. And for Amara, that's, like this straight lines and, this kind of, rigid form is how his experience of living in America, put him in a certain frame or in a certain, rigid system. You have to pay your bills within a certain time. You have to pay your insurance, and those are, like things it's hard to not do. Otherwise, they will have consequences. But in view of Amara, systems like that are rigid systems that puts, an artist in a certain frame. Um, on a flip side, my take on Amara's work is that uh, despite the fact that moving to America has put him in a certain rigid uh, uh, spot, I see the opposite. I would argue that instead moving here has liberated him to paint freely. On the painting on the right side, he doesn't have to, refer to a certain academic, rules. Instead, he just, got a canvas and painted freely, and he doesn't he doesn't have to worry about, following a certain painting rules. Of course, he's a skillful person. He created depths, by thickening and, the lines, and you can see thin lines are painted to indicate further space in the canvas, and thicker are on the front layer. So that kind of technique, you can see it, but still you can see the liberation that he has got moving here instead of being, placed in a rigid system. So I see, I argue that he actually has become more creative than, the way he thinks. He was more free back home. But we have had this conversation a few times, and he doesn't necessarily agree with that. Another artist we have in the first group is El Shafi Dafala from Sudan. El Shafi explores the process African diaspora has to go through, the process of obtaining visa and passport and documentation for travels. Probably some of you have done that, but I've done exactly the same. I've had the same experience with what Shafi is trying to explore, and sometimes it's not easy, and there is a reduction of, human being on a paper by just ticking a box in like the racial categorization of, people on a paper and everything. For Shafi, he believes that those kind of identifications are uh, less relevant, and there is more to us in terms of, humanity. If we don't have the colors, which we don't have in these fingerprints, and there's more that unites us instead. So instead of what separates us based off of our race and country of origin and how we look like. So these are 80 16 by 16 grades collected from people across different parts of the world: Africa, the United States, Asia, and Europe. Shafi usually carries around an ink pad, and he asks people to give him their fingerprints, and he'll bring it home, and he printed without hue. And these are part of 1,000 fingerprints he has, and each time they being presented in different venues, they have a different look. So next time you go to the second floor at McMullen Museum, you see on an orange background with a different grid. And the next is a second group. For this group, artists look back to their culture and history to inform their practice. Some of them goes to, archival research, and sometimes they do occasional visits to Africa, and they bring elements sometimes that reminds them home. The first artist we find in this group is Masimba Hewati, a Zimbabwean artist currently finishing his PhD in Vienna, Austria. This work, however, has been done when he was a student in Michigan, a MFA student. So what we see here is Masimba trying to reappropriate some of the archival images he found through research, archival images of his father he found through research. So his father fought the Chimurenga War of Independence of Zimbabwe in the 60s against the British colonial empires. But his father used to use a local township photography shop to document himself, usually wearing outfits of favorite songs at the time, like the Beatles and other songs of the time that looked like an album cover. So when Masimba found those photographs an adult, he was so fascinated by his father, how he was antagonistic to the British Empire. At the same time, he was drawn into their aesthetic look, and how his father tried to uh, reappropriate and or somehow assimilate some of the aesthetics that the British colonials, brought to Zimbabwe. Uh, so yeah, this is about that, and I think what's interesting is the artists, looking into archives to inform their work. There are a couple of artists in this exhibition that looks into histories and past events in archives to inform their work. Another artist we find in this group is Kern Samuel. He is from Trinidad and Tobago, one of the two artists we have from that region. Um, uh, One of the reasons when I'm thinking about or when I conceptualize, when States of Becoming was at its conceptual stage, I try to look up, different regions of African diaspora in hopes that it can expand the conversation of the diaspora beyond African diasporas only living in the US. So I start looking up artists in different regions, and I've had a few ideas for artists from British and other parts of the world, but I found Kern Samuel and the other artists to be more close to the idea of states of becoming, and that's partly the reason you see artists of the diaspora being in this show. With this particular work, Kern Samuel creates a piece that reminds him of home and his childhood memory with his mom. So the island in the middle you see represents it's a first of it's made out of turmeric, and that represents the spice his mom used to use when she cooked for him when he was a child. He moved here also as a child, and the blue circle surrounding the turmeric represents the water, and the turmeric represents the land he calls one's home, Trinidad and Tobago. So this is about memory and personal history, and that's also what interests me. So partly some of the works are purely chosen and aside from the meanings the artists want to convey, I read them in accordance to how States of Becoming views these artists and how I interpret their work. That doesn't always necessarily mean it aligns with the practice of the artists or the ideas the artists necessarily have about their work, but um, I I see it, or I interpret it in a way that speaks to the idea of the exhibition. This is the two videos. This is also one of the excuse me, the most interesting work we have in the show. It's two videos created by Yvonne Osei, Ghanaian artist who currently lives in the US. And so between in the video, Yvonne, that's her self-portrait, both. Yvonne paints her face with white and black and conceal and creates scratch it to create a scarification, which is a form of identification in parts of West Africa. Yvonne is from the Ashanti Kingdom in Ghana, where blackness is seen as a pride. In most cases, in Africa, that's the case. We don't usually have race questions, but instead, people identify themselves based off of ethnicity or which part of the regions they belong to. So for Yvonne, this identification of black and white is a void and as a shallow. There is more that, there is more than that beside being, black and white. And she argues that there is no such, a pure black, or there is no such a pure white. And she further goes to question where the boundary of, this categorization is and who can define it. It's a very interesting piece, and I invite you all to stop by when you get a chance in the museum to check it out. Another work we have is by Nonsikelelo Mutiti, a Zimbabwean artist currently living and working in New Haven, Connecticut. Everything is where it's expected. In this space, Nonsi tried to recreate the black hair salon. The the head wallpaper represents the conversation that happens in these black hair salons. Conversations sometimes unfiltered, sometimes, intimate in the conversations about current issues, everything that is being, discussed in these salons. In the wall, the objects we see are a replica of black beauty supplies we find in beauty stores, and they are made out of cast. And the prints in the box are some objects Nonsi collected across the cities she lived, objects of hair salons like combs and also prints she co-authored in some of the prints that informs her practice as a. And in overall, the constellation can be appreciative, especially if you have a connection to those kind of communal spaces, like the black saloons serves not only a hair salon space, but also like a therapeutic place. People go to those places and they discuss and they talk about their frustrations, and this kind of spaces are so significant in Black culture. And to appreciate them, we need like that association with these, places. Otherwise, it's just a beautiful work of art and we can appreciate it from that point. But Nosi's point is these are spaces, communal spaces that are significant and relevant to the community. And that's what she is trying to recreate here. Another artist we have is Dora King from Sierra Leone. Uh, when I when we chose this work, one of the reasons is, of course, the continent has, or the artist uh, um, practice different mediums, and among others, poet is one of them. And with this particular piece, Dora wrote a poet, an elegy to her Eta Merke, her grandma, who influenced her passing, influenced Dora to be a poem. So for this one, she wrote a poem in a way of bringing Eta back to life from dead, in this case, back to the canvas. So this custom mourning in most countries in Africa is so significant culturally. When someone passed away, there is a customary in things that needs to be done. For example, there's a 40-day celebration, and you cannot leave a house for 7 days. And it's common in most places, including where I came from. And my other hope bringing this piece to this exhibition is to have a conversation about this unique practice and unique custom to the continent, even if we go all the way back to Egyptian civilization, all the pyramids, all this history is partly because of the way people think about the afterlife or the dead. So in region I came from is so important in terms of the tradition of the dead and mourning. We have next in the second group, we have Vamba Beliti, an Ivorian. And in this painting, as you can see it, he's trying to examine established norms and cultures and trying to recreate and all these norms his own way. And for people who came from other parts of Africa, it's living in the US is not usually, easy. Some norms may go against, what we've been told growing up. For example, where I came from, we don't have street names, sometimes 12, 11 can be 13 feet. And this is like how things sometimes work in where I came from, but in here there is much more different to it. And for Vamba, he is looking at especially like in this kind of institutional approach. The canvas is trapezoidal shape, and the portrait is upside down, and it's presented on a brick leaning against the wall, almost resisting uh, like delicacy and obedience that we mostly perform in dealing with artworks, particularly in gallery and museum settings. So it's one of the very interesting piece we have in the show also, and it speaks to the experience of people who know what this means. This is a third group. These are the artists that are connecting the two continents culturally and historically. Most of the artists in this group are first generation of African artists, African diaspora artists born in the US. Um, I have to mention that also for the first and second group, my first-hand experience of relocating to the from Africa to the United States adds some kind of clarity, authenticity, and emotional depth to states of becoming. Speaking to this artist, I can feels the raw emotions they have when they talk about their experience. And myself, going through that experience, for example, when Vamba talks about, established norms, I can easily relate to that, given that I've gone through the same experience as well. So I believe that my first-hand experience in relocation have helped me a lot in approaching this exhibition from authenticity point of view. So these artists are mostly born in America, and this is Miata Kawenzi, a Liberian and Kenyan parents born in Tennessee. With these two screens, Miata is reimagining the two places of Africa in America, the imagined place of Africa in America. She uses a fragment of words from the national anthem of Liberia and Black American national anthem um, in a way that both speaks to discrimination and slavery and freedom of Black people. They invite these two screens invite a contemplation of these two ideal spaces that exist ideally at the same time in some ways share some sort of culture and history in terms of the struggle of Black people. It's I usually cannot really tell what makes me really interested in this show, but whenever I sit down on the rocking chair also symbolize, the culture Miyata came from in the South, and but this creates some kind of, like in two imagined places when you see on the chair, and there's an audio that Miyata also integrates in the video, and experiencing this really creates some sort of, like bouncing between two imaginary spaces. Next artist we find is Helena Matafaria. In the work on the left, Helena uh, it's a collection. First, it's a collection of some of the performance, and in those works, Selena trying to insert her black body by just simply showing uh, simple gestures to confront the default, white male artists, and she's trying to challenge the canon. Those works are performed one in DC against Barnett Newman and Mark Rothko's work. And what Lena does is trying to confront, the history or the so-called, dominant canon of art history. On the second one on the right, Elena projects from her eyes, and there's a vibrant color of rainbow to um, celebrate and bring those people who, especially women of color, who were underlooked in art world, but especially in the 80s and areas around that when Helena was born. And I believe things are evolving at this point in time, but Helena still wants to shed light to those people, especially during the 80s, who were overlooked and who were um, received in a way that doesn't really reflect their artistic practice. So these are cutouts from magazines, for example, Art Times from the 80s that Helena collected and created this swirling um, shape around her life-size uh, collage. Another artist we find in this group is Yacine Tilala Fall, American with Senegalese and Mauritanian ancestor. For me, this work is very interesting as well, given that Yacine was born here, but she looks back into her ancestors, and sometimes she visits um, those places, Senegal and Mauritania. In this installation, Yacine recreates the baobab tree, which is considered as a metaphor to be a tree of life in Senegal because of the amount of water it contains. And mostly the baobab tree contains water, and water in Yacine's view symbolizes um, an element that connects the fragile with the durable, with the living to dead, and individuals to the community. Um, mm, but what's very important, very interesting is for Yassine to look back and to, go to those places like Senegal and pick up something that's historically significant in her family's ancestral culture and history. I believe this is the last slide, and this is Tariku Shifarrao. He moved here when he was 6, so I had him in the last group. Sometimes I feel like his work fits best in this group. Um, as we can see, it's a painting hung on a wall with markings. Tariku attributes these markings to those musics he grew up listening to, for like those artists, Louis Armstrong, Ralph Ellison, and people like that. Also, his approach can be attributed to uh, an, an artist. It just slipped out of my mind, but an artist, an African American artist, he usually refers to David Hammond. Yes, David Hammond. um, but I think for me as a curator, what's interesting about Tariku is, being in an African diaspora, how he immersed himself to American culture, the American music, hip hop and R&B, all these musics are, significant for in terms for the Black community, and how these artists, regardless where they came from, are involved in this culture and how they immerse themselves in this culture, and and how sometimes speaks to the issues that are surrounding this community. So that's what interests me also with Tarikus. I know he talks about mark making in his practice, but I think his work can be seen beyond that. And that is the last slide we have. And thank you. And I think we can dive into any questions anyone might have. I'm
Wow.
going to stop sharing my screen if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Fitsum, that was the most illuminating introduction to this exhibition. And thank you for sharing also your firsthand experience with us. And the fact that you know all these artists so well really enriches our understanding of your choice of them for the exhibition. So thank you so much. So I think we should probably just open this up to some questions. And since we're all
Yeah.
on a Zoom meeting, please feel free to jump in with a question.
I have to mention that there are a few more artists that I didn't discuss tonight, which will see their works in the exhibition.
I have a question for you. Because I know that you've now curated both obviously here in the US and then also uh, in the museum in Ethiopia. And I wonder if I'd be curious to hear about the comparison of if there are differences between in curating here versus there.
Uh, I will say there are differences, and in terms of the curatorial methodology, perhaps it's always similar, like how we lay out the arrangement of the show and the supporting write-ups and things of that nature. There is a similarity, whereas in terms of time frame in Ethiopia, we don't usually take more time to prepare for a single show. Perhaps that's also related to logistics. But one thing I noticed is that people usually come to our museum with no premeditated perception about the shows they are going to be visiting. So a lot of people come to the exhibition with, openness and, to learn and to engage with the artist. And, if I have a show here, um, I think some people immediately, at least it's my experience, will frame it in a certain way. Africa, oh, Africa, where is Africa? Do you guys, have this, have that? It's mostly, not all, but it's mostly a misconception they bring with you, and sometimes, you have to explain. But in Ethiopia, even if they are not, from that particular country, people oftentimes come to see an exhibition and, and encounter with whatever objects that's in front of them, and start the conversation from them. So that's my observation. In they don't just go to museums just because Fitsum is curating a show. They go to a museum because there is an exhibition and they really engage with the exhibition. Yeah. I think here
Thank you
is
so
very
much.
different. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Fitsum, we have a question that was in the chat from Nina Schneider,
Right.
one of our patrons and docents. And she was wondering if you could say something about Cheeto Johnson.
Yes. So, sorry, I don't have his work. I haven't put his work here, but Chido it's also an artist that I've known him for almost 15 years now. I met Chido when he visited Ethiopia for the first time, and he happens to be one of the two white artists in the show, and it doesn't usually go well with the name and how he looks. And I had him give a presentation one time, and he went on the stage and say, okay, I'm Chido, I'm white, I just want to make sure that because like he understand um, like the disconnection in between the assumption and the reality. But Chido's we have two works of him, Me and Bucket. And the Bucket piece is very interesting to me in a way that it reflects both Chido's European ancestor and African heritage as being a sculptor from growing up and studying in Zimbabwe, where sculpture is a very strong culture. After he moved here, Chido replaces, the time-consuming way of making sculpture by stacking a couple of, buckets from Home Depot on a miniature mahogany piece, and he presented it that way. And for him, that's how sometimes an African diaspora identity is framed in this constant, moving world. In the other piece, Me is something I actually think really represents Chido. There's a piece surrounded by, pieces that are made to be sold. And when Chido was a kid, I've seen, he showed me a picture of him sitting in a classroom exactly arranged like that Me piece. He's the only white student in the middle and in his village, and there are, his other black students next to him. And that tells you that he is out of place. He's at least that's how I viewed the picture he showed me, like when he was in elementary school, and I immediately relate to that Mimi piece, and I felt like he's even there. The picture doesn't really tell or says he belongs there. In a way, he's made, out of place, and he's there just temporarily. And that's how, I connected those to Mimi piece and the picture he showed me and his other piece. But I also, in personal term, I know Chido, and I recently went to the school he teaches in Detroit, and I curated one of the shows for his senior students. Yeah.
Well, anyone else want to jump in?
Sure.
Question?
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes.
Hello, Nancy. Hello, Fitsum. Kristen,
Kristen.
question. I was very interested in the whole show, in which I actually did have a chance to preview it. I'm on campus at Boston College, and so saw
Right.
Diana's was installing it. So it's nice to hear more of the explanation behind it. I look forward to visiting again. But you mentioned some references. You could see it in the paintings, the academic training that several of the artists received, and that was maybe a little surprising to me that still at this stage here and academic, I can see European academic styles. Is that still continuing? Is that changing? Are you and other artists bringing back more of the freedom now that in the States of becoming the sense that, oh, now I can experiment maybe still with artistic principles, as it were, from that academic training, but then trying to come back in a new style, or is there just a very continuing strong academic training that may not be broken in schools? Tell us more about, I guess, to make a long question a little shorter, about the current state of artistic training in Ethiopia and how it's changing. Thank you.
Yes. I'm glad you enjoyed the exhibition, and I look forward to have more conversation. So in Ethiopia, we still have, well, first off, historically, we had a strong, painting tradition because of, all the medieval churches we have at home and everything. But, Ethiopia was a socialist at some point, and our professors were sent to, like the Soviet Union, where craftsmanship is considered to be the gate of heaven for artists, and that's how they were trained. It's shifting a little bit, and people are, like shifting to be more also conceptually, explorative in a way that they still I trained, the same way. I can do really good rendering your face and, things like that. But ultimately, I don't have a meaning to do that anymore. Like, I don't have a purpose doing that, and I still do it if people ask me to do. But I am more into, like engaging in a more conceptual part of an artist. for most of the artists that are from Ethiopia, they have moved to more of a conceptual, like Amara, the artist that uses a ruler. I've never seen him, like drawing. You can still tell there is like an academic element in it, like the way he composes things, the way he creates the atmosphere, even if a line, he still creates a linear atmosphere, that attributes to his academic, but he's become less interested in, exploring that, or being framed by the academic practice of making a painting. For the other artists in the show, Chido is probably the other academician. He teaches also in college, and I see him doing some, academic work of art, especially with sculptures. But and Kibrom, the other artist, is still he's still focused on painting, but he does animation, which I see as a way of shifting or moving away from the academic practice. But I think overall it doesn't hurt to know how to paint a nose or how to paint a face, but it's problematic when if an artist starts worshiping those techniques. At least that's my view. And but it's not bad to know how to do those.
Sure, good. Thank you for
Hopefully
that
I
background. That's good. Yeah,
yes,
that's
yes,
good for the background. But yeah,
yeah,
thank you again.
yeah.
Anyone else want to jump in? Well, if not, it remains for me to thank our speaker and to convey our congratulations to everyone who contributed to the realization of this landmark exhibition that you curated. And I want to say to everyone that I invite you to visit the exhibition and to take an in-person or a virtual tour offered by our museum docents. And I hope to see you in the galleries or at some of our upcoming programs. And until then, everyone should be well. And thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. See you all guys tomorrow.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.